to another session, and I'm your session leader, Lionel. And in this one, we're going to go ahead and talk about the next macronutrient, which is fats. This will be part 2 of the macronutrient series. This is going to be session 101B. Now, real quick, the last video I shot, which was the carbohydrates video, I noticed it was a little grainy, and the reason for that was because I shot it with my iPad, thinking that everything would be okay. I mean, it's an iPad Pro, so it's not like an old iPad or anything. It looks like I'm gonna have to maybe shoot videos with my phone for right now, because it seems like my phone is the device that gets the clearest picture and the most clarity of videos out of all the devices that I do have. So I thought shooting with my iPad was gonna work, but it seemed fine, but it was a little grainy, and because of the length of the video, there really was no sense in me trying to reshoot it. So this time, hopefully everything is nice and clearer, much more concise than my last video. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and get into fats. A little bit of science, not too much, because like I said, if you're like me, you don't want to get hung up on the science of things, right? That may not be that important to you. Maybe nice to know, but may not be that important. A lot of the same atoms are used in fats as is carbohydrates and even proteins. So you have carbons, hydrogens, and oxygen atoms. Getting into the nitty gritty, so fats are also known as lipids. So I don't know if any of you have ever heard, but most people know the term fats. But if ever you hear lipids, they do mean the same thing, right? Lipids and fats, they're synonymous with each other. Now, there are 3 different types of lipids. You have phospholipids, sterols, and then triglycerides. Now, triglycerides may be the one that you know the most or know more of, but I'm gonna start with phospholipids. And what that is it's pretty much, that's the type of lipid that contains phosphorus, and it protects cells against environmental offenses. And it's also, a couple of examples is like soy lecithin and sunflower lecithin. If you're like me and you like to check out the ingredients of certain items and certain foods, you may see soy lecithin or sunflower lecithin in it. The protein powder that I use to make smoothies out of whenever I'm done with the workout and I drink real quick, it's a diamantized ISO 100. That has, at least the brand that I have, the flavor that I use, has soy lecithin in it. There are some other protein powders that have sunflower lecithin. Pretty much, it's still lecithin. It's not really that much of a difference. And there was even a little bit of talk recently, maybe within the past few years or so. I haven't heard that much lately, but there was a little bit of a concern amongst the male group that consuming or over consuming soy could end up messing up your testosterone levels. I've also been reassured by health experts that in order for that to happen, you'd have to consume like a significant amount of soy. I mean, like more soy than you could ever even think about consuming. So chances are you have nothing to worry about if you don't really consume soy like that. Sterols, they aid in biological processes and they maintain the cell membrane. So as you can see, fats tends to have a negative connotation behind it. When a lot of people hear fat, they're like, oh, something I gotta stay away from. But the truth is, your body, just like carbohydrates and proteins, your body needs fats too, especially for like, be it for energy sometimes in certain cases, but you definitely need it for, internal bodily functions as well, all the way down to the cellular level. Cholesterol is a type of sterol. Now you can see sterol is in the suffix of the word cholesterol. So cholesterol is definitely a type of sterol. And then you also have your adrenal and sex hormones. Those are also, different types of sterols as well. The adrenal hormones you may know of as like cortisol and cortisone. And then sex hormones, for men it would be testosterone, and for women, of course, it's estrogen. And then we go to triglycerides. Now, triglycerides is the body's main form of fat storage. And it contains glycerol, which, is a little bit, you can see it in the middle of the word triglycerides. It contains glycerol, which is essentially just an alcoholic substance that, preserves food as it digests and attracts water to the intestinal tract. So this form of fat does sort of help with digestion. And it also produces energy to the body cells, as I actually previously mentioned. And it's stored in what's called adipose cells and tissues. Adipose is essentially fat. They're synonymous as well. So when you hear adipose cells or adipose tissues, that's your fat cells or your fat tissues. and it stores it in infinite amounts. I put in parentheses here, I don't know if you can see it, but in parentheses I put human survival. Now I put that there to sort of, have me segue into instances where triglycerides in infinite amounts may benefit you. Unlike glucose that you get from carbs, right? If you remember from my carbs video, I spoke about how when you intake carbohydrate-rich foods, your body will take it and it will, take a portion of those carbs, turn them to glucose for immediate use, and then it'll store the rest in glycogen stores to be used for later. Well, in the glycogen stores also, I mentioned, it only lasts for about maybe a day to a day and a half before the body has to break it and get rid of it somehow. So here's the difference with triglycerides. So that's going to lead me into why you got to be careful with it. But because they can be stored in infinite amounts, the human survival. So an instance where fat might benefit you is if you're ever in a situation, and hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully you don't ever actually find yourself in this situation. But if you're ever in a situation where, food is not accessible to you, your body will then, use, because again, your body's got to, pull energy from somewhere. So if carbs are not available, fats is usually the, next best thing. So with triglycerides being stored in infinite amounts, your body's essentially going to go to those fatty acids in order to convert, to energy. It'll use your triglyceride stores. So they can be very helpful for you if you're ever in a situation where, access to food is not really feasible. But again, hopefully that's not the case, because you definitely do still need food. And because they store in infinite amounts, that's going to lead me down here to the overconsumption. So what happens with overconsumption is, of course, a couple things. It's going to promote the liver's production of fat, right? Now, because these store in infinite amounts, if you continuously overconsume fats and you're not very careful about how much you consume, at the top of the list, you're looking at, of course, obesity, right? So, overconsumption of fats will then, lead you to more and more increased, accumulation of fat stores, which will then contribute to overweight and obesity. And then, of course, that can lead you to certain cancers and, high cholesterol, heart disease, strokes, hypertension even. So you want to be mindful about overconsumption of fats. That's definitely not something you want, because as I mentioned even in the carbs video, anything in excess, it's going to turn into fat. Your body's got to do something with it. And if it can't use it, then it's just going to store it as fat. It's going to leave it in your adipose tissue, and it's going to stay there until your body's able to turn to it and burn it. Here's underconsumption. All right, so underconsumption is just as bad. Some of the things that can happen with underconsumption is you lose out on cell energy, right? Because if we go back up here, triglycerides produces energy to the body cells. So if you're not getting enough fat in, then your cells don't really have the energy that they need in order to be able to function properly, right? Internal bodily function is just as important as the external. And then you could also miss out on certain vitamins, minerals, and even essential fatty acids. Here's a little preview for you on essential and non-essential. You'll see that here with fatty acids, and you're also going to see it in my next video, which is the last video of the series, proteins. So proteins and fats, right, they have essential, this is essential fatty acids. With proteins, it's essential and non-essential amino acids. The key word is essential. Essential, of course, means necessary or maybe even required. Now, essential fatty acids, or anything essential, right, any essential nutrient is a nutrient that your body has to get from food. Non-essential means your body can synthesize it on its own. It doesn't need, outside, help. It doesn't need food. Essential, that's not really the case. Essential, you have to eat food. You got to get that source, from food somewhere in order to complete the necessary chains and chemical reactions and things like that for your body to go ahead and, have maximum cell energy and activity. It could also affect performance if you underconsume fats. So again, if carbohydrates somehow happen to not be available, it's going to turn to fats as the next best thing. Now, when you don't have enough fats in you, when you don't have enough triglyceride stores for your body to pull from, you'll recognize that, you could be hurt there too, right? Your performance will end up suffering. It's recommended that you get about a teaspoon of fat every meal, okay? So that's, essentially a good way to look at it as, like, I'll just use myself as an example. every morning I make myself egg white, either omelets or I'll do egg white scrambles, right? I'll usually have maybe some veggie sausage patties with it, or maybe I'll have veggie crumbles, or perhaps like the plant-based steak that's in my one of my recipe videos. What I'll do is I'll take about a quarter of a cup of shredded mozzarella cheese, and I'll sprinkle that over my eggs in the morning. It's basically saying, it's okay for you to take, like, if you're making toast, you can spread a little bit of, margarine or butter or what have you, just a little bit, a teaspoon or what have you, every meal. That's what's recommended, so that you don't miss out on, the amount of fats that you're supposed to be getting. But for me, I do the mozzarella cheese because, of course, it's dairy and it does have, some fat in it, right? It's got about, I want to say 6 grams of fat and 3.5 grams of saturated fat. So it's not too bad as long as, you stick to the serving size, which is what I do. Like, I'll actually take, the measuring cups, right? I have like a third, a quarter, a half, and 1 cup. I'll literally go ahead and take a quarter cup, and I'll go ahead and, grab some cheese out the bag and use that quarter cup to spread it over my eggs. It helps me maintain the amount of fat that I'm supposed to be getting, as I eat my meals. I also wanted to talk about hydrogenation process. So I did mention margarine, like, it's something that you can use to spread over your toast as a way to get the teaspoon of fat every meal. So hydrogenation is something you want to be careful of. Okay, hydrogenated products, hydrogenated oils, right, which is usually found in, say, Lay's potato chips, right? In Lay's potato chips, you may find that when you go to eat the bag of chips, you pull out your fingers and you may see like some oils or some grease or what have you. That's what the hydrogenation is. So what hydrogenation does is it takes an unsaturated fat and makes it saturated by adding a hydrogen molecule to it. So an example I have is margarine and shortening, right? Margarine and shortening, if you ever notice, right, they're hard. They come in hard form. They were at one point a liquid, and then hydrogenation turned them into a solid, right? It took an unsaturated fat and made it saturated, turning liquid to solid. So this is what happens with hydrogenation. Something you want to be careful of. And that actually is going to lead me to the second half of the board. We're going to talk about the different types of fats that you'll find in meals, right? And certain items and things like that, when you go to the grocery stores. We have saturated and trans fats, and I'm going to cover 2 at a time because they tend to behave like one another. So saturated and trans fats, they're very similar in how they behave in the bloodstream and in your body. And the same concept applies to the mono and the polyunsaturated fats. So we're going to start with saturated and trans fats, right? They occur in animal-based sources. Now the thing is though, the type of animal-based sources that they occur in, they tend to be the most processed ones and even the ultra processed ones. So like if you go to a fast food restaurant, you grab a burger, or maybe you grab some fries, right? Like your typical, even fried chicken, right? If you get like a spicy chicken from Wendy's, or like chicken nuggets from McDonald's, some stuff like that, you're gonna find saturated and trans fats in those foods. They also promote high cholesterol, so that's why those are the foods you want to stay away from. Now, I'm probably going to reiterate this in the cholesterol video that I plan on making separately, but to give you a little preview, saturated and trans fats, it's been studied by health professionals that those are the types of fats that essentially contribute to certain cancer-causing, instances. So if you overconsume saturated and trans fats, what can end up happening is in your bloodstream, right? Those fatty acids, they accumulate, and then they start to turn over to plaque, right? Those fatty acids literally convert over to plaque. And then what happens with that plaque is they start clogging your artery walls, which of course, will block blood flow to and from your heart, and leaving you with high cholesterol. That's a little background for you on high cholesterol. I'll reiterate it in that separate video, but that's why you want to stay away from saturated and trans fats, or at the very least, limit them as much as humanly possible. You also have mono and polyunsaturated fats. Now, the only difference between these two, and like I said, these two, they behave the same way, but the difference is the polyunsaturated fats consist of omega-3s and 6 fatty acids. These are both considered healthy fats, right? And there's different sources in which you'll find these from. Okay, so like with saturated and trans fats, besides animal sources, you'll also find them in your different snacks, right? And the certain snack foods you like to eat, so like the chips, like I mentioned before, Lay's potato chips, or just really any, even Doritos or Cheetos. You'll find them in any chips. You'll find them in some candies and sweets. You'll find them in, cakes, desserts, right? You can find saturated and trans fats basically in anything that's been processed or ultra processed, and that's not really that great for you. So if you like to snack a lot, you may want to rethink or at least reevaluate a little bit of how much of these you're getting. Okay. So now monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. So these are both healthy fats, and they both promote healthy cholesterol. So to give you a little bit more insight into the cholesterol, right? When you go to the doctor and you have your annual checkup and it's time for you to take your fasting lab, there's what's called a lipid panel. In that lipid panel, there's 4 items, but I'm gonna talk about 2 in this video here. There's the HDL level and the LDL level. LDL stands for low density lipoproteins, and HDL stands for high density lipoproteins. The LDL is also what's referred to as your bad cholesterol. So I'm going to cover acceptable ranges in the cholesterol video, but the LDL level, that's the level you want to make sure doesn't spike over your maximum range, right? You want to keep that in, a normal range. You don't want to spike over and get high, because essentially that's what I deal with. I deal with high cholesterol, so there's times where my LDL may be a little bit higher, but for me it's because of genetics. So if I don't eat right, coupled with my genetics, that could just make things worse for me. Where I'm allowed to have a little bit higher LDL level, but not that much. I still gotta be careful and watch it. Now your HDL, conversely, is what's referred to as the good cholesterol. So over here on the mono and even the polyunsaturated, where I say it promotes healthy cholesterol in the bloodstream, refers to the HDL level, right? So mono and polyunsaturated fats, they have the ability, if you will, to decrease your LDL level and then increase the HDL, okay? Because the way HDL and LDL work, they're very sort of proportion to each other, in that if the LDL is a little higher, chances are your HDL may suffer. Whereas conversely, if your HDL is higher, your LDL may suffer. But you always want to have higher HDL than LDL. You want higher good cholesterol than bad. Now, where you can find these sort of fats from, I listed different oils, and of course there's different foods. I'm going to cover those too. But in oils, for monounsaturated, the avocado oil, canola oil, and olive oil, they're very high in monounsaturated fats. Certain foods, avocados, they have mono and polyunsaturated fats. Nuts, right? Certain nuts like almonds, maybe even some cashews, peanuts, they have mono and polyunsaturated fats too. But you want to be careful with your nuts. You want to be careful with cashews and peanuts, and even peanut butter too, because the thing is with that is while they have monounsaturated fats, they do tend to be just fatty in general. So you want to be mindful about how much peanut butter that you eat or how much peanuts you eat. You want to be mindful about the fat content. And peanut butter does have some saturated fats in it, because if you ever notice, peanut butter is, it's a solid, right? Hydrogenation. So you want to be careful about peanut butter. Not saying peanut butter is bad for you, but in moderation, that's how you want to eat it. Fun fact, I actually, when I was in high school, because I was, lifting heavy, and, for me to put on weight, I was always told that I needed to eat more protein. So what I would do is, I would take a jar of peanut butter with me to school, and I would have a spoon with me, and I would just eat the jar of peanut butter. Not a whole jar, of course, but just over time, a couple spoonfuls here and there to get the protein that I needed. I was advised at the time by someone who bodybuilds that, I needed to eat about 5 to 6 meals a day. And being a teenager at the time and being in high school, that wasn't feasible for me to get 5 to 6 meals a day. And that's something else I'll also cover in another video too, how to get the macros and even the micronutrients out of all your meals, right? But you may not be able to eat the 5 to 6 a day, especially if your goal is to put on muscle. You got to eat more protein, sure, but to eat 5 to 6 meals a day may not be feasible for you. So I'll cover that in a separate video. But that's what I used to do, and I didn't know at the time though that peanut butter, because I didn't really pay attention to nutrition facts like that. So peanut butter, I didn't really understand like the fat behind it, right? I didn't understand like the fatty, content and what it could do to you if you consume it in excess. Peanut butter at the time when I was in high school was the easiest way for me to get, the extra protein I needed for the muscle that I was trying to put on at that time. But as you grow, as you educate yourself a little bit more, you learn more, and you learn that there's other foods you can definitely get proteins from, and that's all we can do, right? The polyunsaturated fats, you can find that in some of your same oils. Well, some of the same oils, but it's a lot more common in safflower, sunflower, and soybean oil. So, those are the oils to consider for polyunsaturated fats, but they also have omega-3s and 6s. Those you can typically get from, fish, right? And there's a specific type of fish though that you eat to get this. It's normally salmon, herring, mackerel, and even some tuna. That's at the top of the American Heart Association. That's at the top of their list. They prefer, those types of fish for your omegas. And so last but not least, you have this little note down here where it says the body will prefer triglyceride stores for light to sometimes moderate intensity activity. So in my carbohydrates video, I mentioned that for moderate to high intensity activity, your body prefers glucose, right? Your body would prefer carbs. But for low to sometimes moderate intensity activity, your body may decide it wants some triglycerides, right? It wants like some of your fatty acids to be able to conduct, that workout or that activity, whatever it is that you're doing. So that's basically it for the fats. Now we're gonna go ahead and do a little recap. Fats are essential to our cells and overall health, but don't overconsume, okay? So you definitely wanna be mindful of, your consumption of fats. Now, once I'm done with the macronutrient series, I'm finally gonna get to cover the K-calorie and the AMDR video, because that you guys really need that one. But like I said, I had to cover this first. I had to cover the macros first. Since K-calories and AMDRs refer to macros, you'll definitely understand like how everything comes full circle. K-calories is gonna be a way for y'all to measure how much, fats, carbs, and proteins, how much of that should be, your total calories, right? Your total caloric intake, if you will. Saturated and trans fats, now it's recommended that should be about 10% of your daily caloric intake. So what's recommended is, you want to try to switch, if you can, switch foods and high fat items for healthier options, okay? So maybe you want to switch, like I do, right? I eat egg whites in the morning. So you may want to switch like from eggs to egg whites. I grew up thinking that yolk was because yolk has the cholesterol in eggs. So I grew up thinking that the yolk was the bad part of the egg. But, it turns out it might not be. Like I said, that's still being studied. But, for me, since I deal with high cholesterol genetically, I like to be on the safe side. So I switched out my eggs for egg whites, right? So you just want to switch out, certain high-fat foods for healthier items. Like if you like to cook with butter, for example, maybe use oil instead. Maybe use olive or avocado oil, which is what I do. I don't cook with butter anymore. I stopped cooking with butter probably about a year and a half ago. So, I stopped doing that. Even cooking sprays is good for you. Maybe, switch like your processed meats for, certain like maybe vegetarian or vegan options. Not to say you got to go full vegan or vegetarian, but maybe switch those out. Or do like, to make sure that they're leaner, right? So maybe, if you're looking at chopped meat, maybe go with the 93.7 or the 96.4. The 96.4 is the leanest option that you can go with. Basically what that is when you look at it, it's the ratio of lean content to fat content. So 96.4 means that meat is 96% lean and about 4% fat. Same thing with 93.7, right? You're looking at 93% lean, 7% fat, content. And I believe there's like 85-15 and then 75-25. So just remember, the lower you go, the more fat you're gonna see. And not just overall fat, you're gonna see saturated and trans fats too. So you definitely wanna be mindful. So maybe think about switching your food so that you actually get 10% of your caloric intake daily value and nothing more. Then we have, of course, eat more mono and polyunsaturated fats, right? The AHA, of course, recommends, as I spoke earlier, that you eat maybe more fatty fish, right? Eat more, again, mackerel, tuna, herring, and salmon. So those are the type of fish that the AHA recommends. Lean options, greater than ultra processed options. In the fitness and nutrition realm, there's a sort of a ratio circling around 80-20. So basically what that is it boils down to you want to eat, like 80% lean foods, whole foods, grains, nuts, fruits, veggies, of course. And then 20% can be the saturated and trans fats, basically the unhealthy stuff. So the 80-20 rule is what's been circling around the fitness and nutrition realm. If it works for you, cool. If not, if you don't want to really take your chances like that, then remember, more lean options. If you can stay away from that entirely, cool. But definitely just make sure you restrict yourself, okay? Because at the same time, I recognize we all have our guilty pleasures. I'm gonna try my best to, get someone to just cut back as much as possible on something that they're not really supposed to get. And last but not least, I covered a little bit of it in this video, but there's going to be a separate video for cholesterol and lipid profiles, right? That's got to be its own video. I can't really cover all of that here, but I had to give a little bit to you so that you understand how cholesterol works in conjunction with the saturated and trans fats, as well as the mono and polyunsaturated fats. All right, well, that's going to conclude this video. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Remember to like, subscribe. If you got any comments, questions, or concerns, please hit my comment section. I check them periodically. And thank you all. This has been session 101B, fats. And I'll see y'all on the next one. 101C, that's going to be proteins, and that'll be the last of the macronutrient video before I start getting into the nitty gritty of what you may not have heard in the nutrition and fitness realm. So have a good one, y'all.